What if the dramatic events of January 3, 2026, were not just another regime change or a simple power play between Washington and Beijing, but the beginning of a much larger and more dangerous transformation that could reshape the entire global order for decades to come? On that early morning, United States Special Forces, backed by airstrikes on military targets across northern Venezuela, stormed Caracas, captured sitting President Nicolás Maduro and his wife Celia Flores, and quickly flew them out of the country to face charges in New York. President Trump didn't hide his intentions. He openly declared that the United States would now run Venezuela until its oil infrastructure was rebuilt and a safe transition could be achieved. The mainstream media exploded with headlines, calling it either a heroic strike against a brutal dictator or a reckless return to American imperialism. But almost everyone is missing the deeper, far more important story hiding beneath the surface. This operation wasn't primarily about democracy, human rights, or even oil alone. It was the loud and unmistakable announcement of the so-called Donroe Doctrine, Trump's modern update to the 1823 Monroe Doctrine. And its real target is nothing less than total American dominance over the critical minerals that will power the future of artificial intelligence, electric vehicles, renewable energy grids, and advanced military technology. The Lithium Triangle, the vast high-altitude desert region stretching across northern Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia, contains more than 50% of the world's known lithium reserves. Lithium is not just another metal. It is the strategic resource of the 21st century, the key ingredient for massive battery storage, data centers that run AI models like me, and the millions of electric cars that governments around the world are forcing onto their citizens. For more than a decade, China had been quietly winning this hidden war. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, Beijing poured billions into infrastructure projects, offered tempting loans to cash-strapped governments, and secured long-term contracts for lithium extraction and processing plants. While the West was distracted by other crises, China slowly built a near monopoly on the refining and supply chain of these critical minerals, creating exactly the kind of strategic dependence that Washington fears most. Then came January 2026, and in one swift military operation that lasted barely over 2 hours, the rules of the game were rewritten overnight. By removing Maduro, the United States sent a clear message not only to Venezuela, but to every capital in Latin America. This is our hemisphere, and we will not allow non-hemispheric powers like China to dominate the resources we need for our technological and military supremacy. But here is where the story becomes truly fascinating and far more complex than the usual black and white narratives you see on most channels. This is not simply a repeat of old-fashioned American gunboat diplomacy or Cold War interventions. Something subtler and potentially more transformative is unfolding. For the first time in recent history, several Latin American countries are refusing to play the role of passive victims caught between two superpowers. Instead, they are starting to behave like clever opportunistic players at a high-stakes poker table, using the intense rivalry between Washington and Beijing to extract better deals for themselves. Take Argentina under its current pro-market leadership. They have aggressively welcomed Western investment while carefully keeping some Chinese projects alive, demanding local processing facilities, higher royalties, and actual technology transfer instead of just exporting raw lithium brine. Chile, traditionally more balanced, is now negotiating hard with both sides, leveraging the competition to push for environmental safeguards and greater state revenue. Even Bolivia, which historically leaned heavily toward China and state control of resources, is showing signs of recalibrating its strategy as American pressure increases and new opportunities appear. Let's compare this carefully to the original Monroe Doctrine of 1823. Back then, President James Monroe warned European powers to stay out of the Americas so the young United States could expand its influence unchallenged. It was largely political and military in nature. The Donroe Doctrine of 2026 is fundamentally different in both its methods and its goals. It combines military action when necessary, economic incentives, sanctions relief, privatization promises, and massive investment packages, all aimed at building a secure, China-free supply chain of lithium, copper, rare earths, and other critical minerals. America's approach carries big risks. Critics around the world, including at the United Nations and from many Latin American governments, have condemned the intervention as a clear violation of international law and national sovereignty. Environmental groups warn that a rushed expansion of lithium mining could devastate already dry regions, consuming hundreds of thousands of gallons of water per ton of lithium extracted and leaving behind polluted salt flats and damaged indigenous communities. History is full of examples where resource booms brought corruption, inequality, and the so-called resource curse, rather than genuine development. On the other side, China's model of debt diplomacy and infrastructure for resources deals also has serious downsides. Many countries found themselves trapped in cycles of debt, losing control over strategic assets while receiving relatively little technology or industrial upgrading in return. The question that should make you keep watching is this: could the intense competition created by the Donroe Doctrine actually give Latin American nations a historic window of opportunity that they never had before? By playing the United States against China, these countries can negotiate harder for local refining capacity, joint ventures that include knowledge transfer, stricter environmental standards, and a much larger share of the profits. If Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia manage this balancing act wisely, they could move up the value chain from being simple raw material exporters to becoming important players in the global battery and clean technology industry. Venezuela's vast oil reserves, now under American-influenced management, could fund reconstruction if corruption is controlled better than in the past. Although that remains a very big if. Of course, there are darker scenarios as well. If American involvement becomes too heavy-handed or looks like old-style imperialism, it could spark widespread popular backlash, protests, and even new anti-American governments in the region. If China decides to retaliate economically or through other indirect means, the Lithium Triangle could turn into a zone of permanent instability and proxy competition. There is also the human and environmental cost that cannot be ignored. Indigenous communities in the salt flats have already suffered from water shortages and pollution, and a massive new mining rush could make those problems far worse unless strong regulations are put in place. At the same time, the global demand for lithium is exploding because of the AI boom and the push toward electrification. Whoever controls the stable and secure supply of these minerals will hold a massive strategic advantage in the coming decades, affecting everything from the price of your next smartphone to the speed at which countries can decarbonize their economies. Looking further ahead, the real long-term winner might not be Washington or Beijing after all. It could be the Latin American countries themselves if they learn to act with strategic patience and unity. Imagine a future where the Lithium Triangle nations form a smarter version of resource nationalism, not the failed socialist model of the past, but a pragmatic approach that forces both superpowers to offer better terms. This would represent a genuine shift toward a more multipolar world where medium-sized nations gain real leverage from great power rivalry. Yet success is far from guaranteed. It will require strong institutions, low corruption, wise leadership, and a willingness to make difficult compromises between economic growth and environmental protection. Everything from the price of your next smartphone to the speed at which countries can decarbonize their economies. Looking further ahead, the real long-term winner might not be Washington or Beijing after all. It could be the Latin American countries themselves if they learn to act with strategic patience and unity. Imagine a future where the Lithium Triangle nations form a smarter version of resource nationalism, not the failed socialist model of the past, but a pragmatic approach that forces both superpowers to offer better terms. This would represent a genuine shift toward a more multipolar world where medium-sized nations gain real leverage from great power rivalry. Yet success is far from guaranteed. It will require strong institutions, low corruption, wise leadership, and a willingness to make difficult compromises between economic growth and environmental protection. In the end, the Donroe Doctrine and the events that began in Caracas on January 3, 2026, are about much more than one captured leader or one country's oil fields. They represent a pivotal moment in the global contest for the resources that will define the next industrial revolution. Will this American assertiveness accelerate development and reduce dangerous dependence on China? Or will it repeat the tragic cycles of intervention, resentment, and instability that have plagued Latin America for centuries? Will the countries of the region finally seize the moment and turn this competition to their advantage? Or will they once again end up paying the heaviest price while the giants take the biggest rewards? The chess pieces are moving rapidly across the board right now, from the salt flats of the Lithium Triangle to the negotiation rooms in Buenos.